Now, probably the biggest challenge that the sequel trilogy has faced is the fact that it really wasn't needed for the overall story or saga. And don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying that nobody wanted it, because pretty much every Star Wars fan has always wanted Episode 7 and to see what becomes of all our favorite characters. But when you look at the first six movies, at the story it told, and the way Return of the Jedi ended, well, really the only thing Episode 7 could do is undo what was already a complete, near perfect story. And no, I'm not trying to bash the sequel trilogy here or say it shouldn't have been made. I dare say I was as excited as everyone else the day I heard Disney had bought Lucasfilm and that the story would be continuing. A little apprehensive about the way Disney would handle the franchise, sure, but still very excited and eager to see Episode 7. And even though I had some issues with The Force Awakens, in general I liked it and thought it was worthy to be called a Star Wars movie. More or less, it was an homage to the original and introduced us to good characters and set up a few mysteries for the rest of the trilogy to answer. It carried the story forward in a way that seemed to justify the story actually continuing, which was, whether you realize it or not, probably the largest obstacle it had to overcome. And when I really think about it, for better or worse, it was exactly the movie it needed to be. And what I liked most about Episode 7, especially now in hindsight, is the fact that it seemed Vader and or Anakin was still going to be a part of the story. And I of course make reference to the fact that Kylo Ren in the movie seems to be talking to the helmet of Darth Vader as if it's shown him visions before, and the fact that Kylo promises to finish something Darth Vader himself has started. And whether or not this is something that some aspect of Darth Vader that somehow still remains is actually showing Kylo Ren, or just his own imagination, or even a manifestation of his own desires to be like Vader, is actually irrelevant. Though the idea that Vader's story would almost directly continue through a nephew or niece is about the only real way you could justify the main Star Wars saga continuing. Because keep in mind, the first three movies were about Anakin's fall, and the next three about his redemption. And then we had this perfect ending where Anakin comes back to the light and saves his son and destroys the Emperor who had turned him in the first place. Which means we can then assume Luke will go on to rebuild the Jedi Order, the order his father had destroyed. We can also assume that the loss of Palpatine and Vader, along with the destruction of the second Death Star, was a crippling blow to the Empire and that, soon enough, a new Republic would rise. We also see that Han and Leia have fully embraced their love for each other and can assume a happy ending for them as well. Again, the ending was near perfect on almost every level, and the only way for the story to continue, unfortunately, was to destroy this ending in some respect, but as carefully as possible as to not undo all previous six movies. And I think, overall, The Force Awakens did a pretty good job of that, because as I said, dealing with some remnant of Vader was about the only way you could justify this particular story continuing, and that was what The Force Awakens seemed to be doing. I mean, sure, I think you could have made another Star Wars movie set 30 years after Return of the Jedi, featuring the same characters, and not called it Episode 7, and done pretty much anything you really wanted with it at that point. But, obviously for marketing reasons mainly, they weren't going to do that, so they called it Episode 7, at which point it should then have to hold true to the story that came before it and feel like a direct continuation, which means Vader, the focal point around which the previous six movies had spun, should still be present and be at least part of the reason for continued conflict. And in The Force Awakens, he was, because we saw that his nephew was seemingly being haunted by Vader, and that the remnant of the Empire, an empire Vader helped create, had now reformed and was a threat to the galaxy. And now this is the part of the video where people are going to say I'm bashing The Last Jedi, even though that's by no means my intent here, and I'm going to try to be as objective as possible. And with that said, the problem with The Last Jedi is it disconnected itself from the previous 7 movies and, most glaringly perhaps, moved away from this idea that Kylo Ren was acting under the influence of Darth Vader or a desire to be like him. Sure, we can perhaps infer that Kylo makes the decisions he does in this movie because he wants to be like Vader, but it's never directly addressed or even hinted at. And sure, you can say Rian Johnson did something different with Kylo Ren and tried to evolve him beyond just a Vader wannabe, and though that might be great for the character of Kylo Ren, it's not necessarily great or befitting of the overall story, and that's because the direction had been set with the previous 7 movies, and to move away from it now feels jarring. And I dare say that's one of the reasons some didn't like this movie, even if they don't realize that's the reason. And you might now counter by saying, Thor, you just wanted this movie to be fan service and be boring and predictable and offer nothing new. To that, I would first ask why fan service is thought of as such a bad thing. When did it become such a horrible mistake to sometimes give people what they wanted out of a movie? Sure, too much of it is a problem, no doubt. But some level of it not only is fine, but also is necessary to help us fans watching it know how much the people making it love, respect, and know the story that came before it. Besides, you can still give people what they want and surprise them and give them something new. It certainly wouldn't have been impossible to give us a movie that shocked and surprised us, yet was also exactly what we wanted and hoped for. Anyway, the true problem with the story right now is we find ourselves almost exactly where we did at the start of episode 4. An empire is ruling the galaxy, a rebellion is emerging to stop it, and we have one last hope that can save us all. The problem this time, however, is we only have one movie left to wrap it all up, and perhaps an even bigger problem is our one lone hero has already defeated the main villain once before, which pretty much takes all the tension out of any confrontation to come between them. And the real reason why so many dislike the character of Rey is we have yet to see her truly fail, and it's hard to root for somebody we know that is going to ultimately win in the end. And now let me speak even more candidly for a moment, because I know a lot of people who watch my videos have been upset with me about my videos regarding The Last Jedi, and that they haven't been more favorable towards the movie. And as I've said before, I don't hate this movie. Hell, I went into it wanting to love it. But I just don't understand why they did what they did with it. I don't. And though I don't consider myself a master storyteller or anything, I think I have enough logic and common sense in me to realize when something comes along that just doesn't fit with everything else that came before it or doesn't progress the story in a meaningful way. And no, this isn't just me being upset about Luke. This is me wondering how this movie honors what came before it and how it sets up what comes next. Because as I said a moment ago, it reverted us back to a previous state instead of moving the story forward in a true new direction. Because assuming episode 9 is going to be the last of the saga movies, at least for a great many years, we should have been set up for some sort of grand emotional conclusion for the Skywalker family. Instead, Luke is dead, Vader's an afterthought, and Ben Solo or Kylo Ren, for reasons unknown to us, has fully committed himself to the dark side, and will either have to be destroyed or saved by Rey, a character who has yet to fail. On top of all that, the galaxy seems to be firmly, or about to be firmly, under the rule of the First Order, and only one small ragtag group is currently left to oppose them. So when this next movie starts up, it's going to have to be set several years in the future, so that a huge new rebellion will have formed to be able to not only challenge the First Order, but defeat them all in the span of one movie. And though the time jump is not an issue and nothing new to Star Wars, the fact that we're almost certainly going to watch a rebellion launch one last-ditch effort against an empire, or in this case the First Order, while Rey will almost certainly confront Kylo Ren with the hopes of saving him, sounds oddly familiar to something I've seen before somewhere, which of course begs the question, what did this new trilogy accomplish? And look, I could be wrong, and J.J. Abrams could pull a masterpiece out of his ass that truly does take the story and its end in a direction that no one can imagine right now. But that in itself would then be jarring to what The Last Jedi just set up for us. And now let me say again to all of you who think I hate The Last Jedi and seem anywhere from disappointed that I do to just upset by the fact. It's not that I hate this movie. It has its plot holes, sure, but just as a movie, it's fine and offers interesting characters and a generally fun story. But as the 8th part of a story, however, I just don't get it. I don't get why it left us where it did, with only one movie left to go in what, my opinion, is the greatest saga ever told. I don't see how we're going to have an ending anywhere near as satisfying and befitting to the overall story as Return of the Jedi was, and really, that's what this trilogy needed to do. It needed to justify its existence by progressing the story from the previous 6 movies and giving us an ending that makes us say, yeah, everything wasn't finalized, if you will, at the end of Return of the Jedi, but now it is. And yes, I'd wanted and waited for the continuation of this story my whole life. I've always wanted to see on the big screen what happened next to our heroes, but only now, at the end, do I understand that George Lucas was right when he said there was no story left to be told after Return of the Jedi. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. As much as I think we all wanted it, would we have been better off in some respect never getting the sequel trilogy, but instead maybe a story set in the same time period, but separate from it with the same characters? Let me know in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.